Okay, so we talked a little bit already about this kind of game plan for the rest of the project, but we've defined X mark and hopefully O mark. Okay, you're going to get a chance to see whether your O mark really works or not. Okay, and you should have started defining the TicTacToe class. So step one here is to draw grid lines for the board. And if we click over to Eclipse, okay, so those are the coordinates that we talked about in class for the board. If you use different coordinates, that's fine. But if we run this, we should see that it looks like a tic-tac-toe game. Okay? All right. So then step 2 here is going to be to determine how many X and O objects will be necessary and declare those objects. All right. So going back over to Eclipse, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but how many X's can I have in the game if X goes first? Okay, good. We're going to have 5 X's. So we're going to go in here and go X mark, X1, X2, X3, X4, and X5. All right? And then I'm going to let you guys, so for this whole project pretty much, I'm going to let you guys figure out what you're doing with O mark. Okay? I'm not going to show you the code for O mark. I'm not going to, I mean, eventually I'll probably have some O mark stuff in here just because it'll be pretty hard to talk about other stuff if I don't, but that's kind of the part that you're doing on your own. Okay, so I'm just going to do the X mark stuff, then you would declare whatever O marks you need here. All right, and let's go back over to this. So we've determined how many X's and we've declared those objects. Now we want to draw an X object and an O object in any square on the board to just check that it works. Okay, then we want to only draw an X in the top left square when that square is clicked. If we can figure that out, then we want to be able to draw an X in whichever square is clicked. Okay, and if we can figure that out, then we want to start alternating X's and O's being placed on click. Okay, so hopefully you, like I said, hopefully you've already had this done and you can kind of make your grid in there. All right, the tic-tac-toe game class could potentially have, we said, 5 X objects. And you're going to figure out how many O objects it could have. So we're going to add code to declare those objects. We just did that. Then we're going to talk about this next paragraph here. An X should show up on the screen when the mouse is clicked in a square area. So we're going to add a mouse clicked method to the tic-tac-toe class. All right. So let's go ahead and review this, some stuff that we've done before. So the first thing I want to point out to you is that a while back we made a time class. Okay, so we said this class is going to represent any time variable or any time object that I want. And every time should have an hours, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And we can instantiate it, or we can use the constructor to build a time with a certain number of hours, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. Okay, so I'm just trying to review what we've done in the past. All right. In this WAS program, or you had it for your Kim program or whatever, right? We had a time object declared called T, and then we made a new time. And we're going to do something similar to that today, except we're going to be making an X mark. Okay? So if you went over to the tic-tac-toe class and you did something like X1 equals a new X mark, okay, and you said, for example, that you wanted your X mark to show up at 250, 250, right? Then you could, after that, tell X1 that you wanted it to draw. All right? And if you did that and ran your code, now not only do you have those grid lines, but you also have an X mark that's drawn at the point 250, 250. Okay? So let's just kind of talk about what this is doing right here. So eventually this is going to look a little bit different in our actual game, but What we want to do here is talk about, like, well, what is this code actually doing? So up here we're declaring x1 to be an x mark. Right here what we're doing is we're using the constructor. Okay, so we're sending the values, or what computer nerds call passing the values. Okay, we're passing the value 250 to the constructor inside of x mark, and that becomes the x. All right, and then we're passing the value 250, and that becomes the value the y. And now the x and the y are used to assign x and y variables for this particular x mark called x1. So x1 has an x equal to 250 and a y equal to 250. All right. Then in TicTacToe, we're telling x1 that it should draw. All right. And when it does its draw method, it uses its x, which is 250, and subtracts 70 from that, so that's 180, and its y minus 70 is 250 minus 70 is 180, all right? And it uses its x and y to figure out these other coordinates, and it draws two lines, okay? So we saw that happening right there. So this is the point 180, 180, this is the point 320, 320, etc. So it's drawing those lines. So that's how that's working. And we're going to use other x's in this as well. Okay, so eventually we might have x2 that gets drawn, or x3 that gets drawn, etc. Okay, but this is the basic idea. However, I don't want the game to start out like that. When do I want x1 to be created? When I click, right? So to add that functionality to the game, what do I have to add to the code? Say it again? Okay, a mouse event method. Good. And which mouse event method do I want to use? Mouse clicked, right? So I want to go ahead inside of here and write in a new method. So I'm going to go public void mouse clicked. And every mouse event method needs a mouse event parameter. All right. So for me, mouse event was already imported. Okay. So for you guys, you might have to import mouse event. Okay. So you can just mouse over that, and it'll figure out what you need to do. Okay. So what do I want to know inside of the mouse clicked method, or what do I want to do? Okay, I want to find x and y, right? I want to know where I clicked the mouse. So inside of here, I want to go int x equals mouse.getX, and int y equals mouse.getY. Okay, and basically what I'm doing there is getting the location of the mouse. All right. And what else do I want to do when I click the mouse? Say it again. So I don't really want to draw an X in here, right? But I do want to do what? Okay, so eventually I want to tell it to do a draw method. Okay, so I want to repaint in here. So that's basically saying draw the game again. But before I do that, so in between determining where the mouse was clicked and telling the game to draw itself again, I want to, like, what's the reason that I'm clicking? If I'm playing the game, I want to click so that I can do what? Yeah, I want to make an X, right? So I really want to take this code, if you already did this up in draw, I really want to take this code and move it down to here. Okay, so I'm going to take that code and I'm going to move it down to there, so that now I'm saying x1 equals a new X mark, and I really don't want it to be at 250, 250. Okay, if I leave it at 250, 250, and I run it, no matter where I click, I'm getting my x to show up at 250, 250. So what do I want to put in place of 250, 250? X and Y, good. Okay, so I want this thing to show up, for now, wherever I click. Okay? So this is pretty good, but there is a problem with this code, and I want to just talk about it briefly here. It doesn't look as bad for me as it does for you guys. Okay, so let's just kind of talk about it for a second. So I want you to notice that every time I run this, in the background here, I'm getting this error. Okay, and this error is a null pointer exception. So this is the way that you read these. So basically you're going to get like this long line of like red text down here. Okay, and this is in the console. And so if you scroll up to the point where this starts, where this like thing happens to the left, okay, this tells you the type of error that you're getting, and this is called a null pointer exception. Okay, so we're going to talk about what that means in a second, but what I want to do is just show you that for this, now anywhere I click, I'm getting this X to show up. Okay, so I'm clicking, and that X, this is still X1. Every time I do this, I'm making a new X and calling it X1. All right, so that should be working. Now when you run yours, it should show up as a blank screen, but if you click it, like it should show up like this, but it's just empty. If you click it, all of a sudden it's going to start drawing everything for you. Okay, so let's talk about that null pointer exception. All right, so we've talked about the word null before, and the idea behind null is that an object that doesn't have a value is given like a placeholder value called null. Okay, and so what's happening in this draw method is we're drawing these 4 lines, and then we're telling x1 to draw, but x1 isn't an object yet. It just has the placeholder value null. So in other words, all of these values are null right now. Okay, x1, x2, x3, all the way through x5. Those are all null, so I can't tell something that's null to draw. All right. Once I click the mouse, x1 now has a value. It's a new X mark. And so when I tell it to repaint, and that's what happened for you guys, after you clicked, it was able to do the job. Okay? Because x1 now has a value, so we can tell it to draw. But up until that point, you just had a blank space because .draw was causing that exception to happen. Okay? So for now, and this may not be what we want to do eventually, but for now what we're going to do to fix that is we're going to put in a little decision in here, and we're going to say if x1 is not equal to null, then tell x1 to draw. And basically what we're doing here is saying draw x1 if it exists as an object. Okay? In other words, it's not null. Okay, so once you add that code in there, so for me, I'm not getting an error down here. It's not popping up with that red text, and still it works so that every time I click, I'm getting x1 to show up in the right spot, the spot where I clicked. Okay, so we'll come back to this code in a second here, but let's just look at this real quickly here. Okay, the next thing that we are doing, so what we've done so far is we've made the X so it shows up wherever we click. The next thing that you want to do is make it so that when you click in this box, the X gets centered inside of that box. Okay, so wherever I click in here, the X shows up in the middle of that box. And this kind of talks about how that should work. And I'm going to leave you guys to do that on your own for today.